All right. Bunch of people here that I don't think I've ever met before. My name is Jeff Herman. I'm one of the online data science instructors. Wanted to go over using Spyre. I have some students in my cohorts that are working on their capstones and are wanting to build web applications. I think using Spyre is a really nice, easy way to do it. At my last job, I was a data scientist at a railroad, and there's still some, to my knowledge, still some Spire dashboards that are in production right now, which I think is kind of cool. So I'm going to be showing you, this is going to be kind of a tutorial style where I just walk through an example. If you have any questions along the way, definitely stop me. So during this study group, I'm going to be making a simple web application using Spire. A web application, it's another name for a program. So there's an input and it returns an output. And so web, that's the application part. The web part is it's on the web. Web applications make it easier for non-technical stakeholders to explore data. So at my last job, I took some data that we had and did some played around with it in pandas and then exported it out to this dashboard. So people that didn't have the ability to do the data manipulation and cleaning that someone with a technical background could do could still see the results of that. And the reason I'm going to be using Spyre, one, because I have experience with it, but two, so I'm a data scientist. I'm not a web developer. Spyre doesn't require any front end skills. So to build this little web application, I'm only going to be using pandas and matplotlib, which are two things that I'm really comfortable with. You'll probably see a lot of tutorials using Flask, and if building web applications is something you're really interested in, you'll probably eventually want to start teaching yourself a little bit of Flask. But I think Spyre is a kind of a nice introduction to it, and yeah. So let's get started. So I'm going to be building a web application, kind of a dashboard style. I found this data set on Kaggle that I thought was kind of interesting. And first, I'm going to build what I'm going to do on Spyre, but I'm first going to do it in a Jupyter notebook. So I have a data set. This is on different educational spending. States. So bunch of historical information about states and how much they spend on education. I kind of explored this data set a little bit earlier. The scope of this kind of study group is not really to explore this data set. It's just to build a Spyre application. So don't worry too much about the content of the data set, but I'm going to make a new column called spent per student. And this is going to be the columns. Yeah, I can't remember which column it is now all of a sudden. Total expenditure. So yeah. So I want to look at how much each state spends per student. So total spent divided by DF grades all. So I've got this new column, and let's say I want to compare two states, and I want to plot that out. And then I want a user to be able to go in and select two states and do this, print out these results, and then print out this plot for them. So let's pick two states. We'll pick Missouri. I know Raphael's based in Tejas, so we'll pick Texas too. So look at my data frame. I'm going to set the year to be the index because I'm going to make this into a time series. Place equals true. And first thing I'm going to do is just return a single data frame. So create a new data frame. Spent. And do the same thing for the second state. And that did not work. Oh, I want df1. So here's the final table. This is what I want to output on my Spyre application, where a user goes in, selects two states, then it outputs a data set, a clean data set for them, and also I also want it to output a line graph. So let's import matplotlib. All right, so here's the basic pandas we're going to do. We put in an input, which is going to be the two states. It's going to output a data frame, and it's going to output a graph. And then the user will be able to select any two states that they want to. So that's what's going to be going on the back end. What I'm going to be using to do this is called Spyre. And let me show you what Spyre looks like on GitHub. And when I'm looking at something new on GitHub, I'm not big on just like reading documentation. I like to first I like to get an example and get that working, and then kind of explore what all the different parts are. So let's I want to show you how my approach for learning Spyre. So this is called the simplest of examples. So this looks like a great start. And put this into a text file. I'm going to be using Sublime Text. I'm just going to call it my example. And we're going to run this on the terminal and navigate to that file. Python my example.py. Let's go. And it will fire up on this server right here. So you'll want to copy this URL right here, and this is where it's going to be run locally. Similar to how like a Jupyter Notebook's running on a server locally. And so here's the basic. Just with this line, this code right here, you're able to get this. And it takes in a simple input. So my name is Jeff. And outputs right there. So that's kind of the base example that I'm building my web app on. So this GitHub, this is important for a lot of information. I also said I don't like to look at the documentation until I've got a working example, and I've got a working example now. So I want to take this example, this kind of boilerplate code, and update it for my specific situation. So if we take a look at this code right here, there's a title that corresponds with this part right here. There's an input. There's a lot of different inputs you can use. If we take a look at the documentation, we can have text boxes, we can have radio buttons, we can have checkbox groups, we can have drop downs, we can have sliders. And then there's an output. And in this instance, the output is just HTML. So it takes whatever you wrote. This is the HTML for a B to make it bold, and prints it out. So it takes my name, takes my text, puts it right there. In this specific example that I'm going to be going over, the user is going to be able to select all 50 states. So I'm going to be using a drop down for that. So the user can click a button, a drop down will appear, and select which 2 states that they want to compare the education spending on. So let's start kind of customizing this. So I want to update simple app. I'm going to call that something different. Call it something specific for my situation. I'm going to call it education spending by state. And if you want to update anything, you just save your file and refresh it. Educational spending by state. So next thing I want to update is I want to update the input. I don't want a text box here. Like I said earlier, I want a drop down. So I'm going to be looking at this drop down right here. And let's start updating my drop down. So the type is not going to be text. It is going to be a drop down. The key, so whatever the input that the user selects, it saves it in a dictionary. So this is going to be the key in that dictionary. I'm going to be having 2 inputs. The user will select the 1 state and they'll select the 2nd state. So this first key, I'm just going to call state 1. You just want to name it something that kind of makes sense. The label is going to be just something that makes sense as well. So I'm going to call it state 1. And then with I'm going to delete the action ID. I'll be talking about this a little bit later. With a drop-down, you have options. And in Spyre, the options are in the form of a list of dictionaries. So for my specific example, each state will be its own dictionary. And so I'll have a label. The label corresponds to what the value is going to be in the drop-down. So it would be Alabama, if that's how you wanted it to look like. The value, this is what the value you want to save in your in your dictionary. So right now I'll have a dictionary where the key is state 1, and it'll be whatever this value is right here. Put that in the same spot. I'm going to be, if you look at my original data, all the states are in all caps. So I'd want that to match up. So I'm going to make Alabama in all caps. Alabama. And let's save this. And so now I have a drop down with a single value. I typed out earlier all 50 states, so you won't have to watch me do that because that would probably take me about 5 to 10 minutes. So I'm just going to copy over the 50 states. So all 50 states are in a list of dictionaries where the label is the state in regular with just the first letter being capitalized, the value being in all caps. Again, the reason the value is in all caps because my data set, the state is in all caps, and I want to correspond to that. So let's save this and see if it works. It looks like I got an extra comma there. I'd recommend saving and trying to run it every once in a while because it is a little bit hard to debug. And it looks like I got an issue. So this is the server that's running. If you're gonna debug this, it's usually above this part that gives you the problems. So it says line 71 in get HTML.
I think it's just waiting for that input response for the input.
Loads a drop down. So I don't have. So I changed my key. So the original example, the key was words. Now I'm at state 1. Think about it. So then crash it. Let me restart the server. What am I doing wrong? So I got a list of lists in here. So it just needs to be a list of dictionaries. I think I copied and pasted it wrong where I have an extra set of square brackets. I'll remove that. And I don't need that. I don't need that. So I have a list of dictionaries. All right, I think I got it working.
You do need to close out the inputs.
Say that one more time.
Need to close curly brackets and then square brackets for inputs.
Curly brackets and square brackets. Oh, yeah. So let's try and clean this up a little bit. So curly brackets and square brackets for inputs. Absolutely. All right, nicely done. So we got a drop down. And I want 2 states, so I'm going to put in pretty much just copy and paste the same thing and put in a second state so the user can select 2 states, so like Missouri or Texas, so they can kind of make this visualization. We're going to be grabbing our second input, and I'm going to call this input state 2. And it is right there. And this will be, the key will be state 2, and the label will be state 2. And I think we're good. We'll find out then. So now we have 2 drop downs. So we made it through that. Another thing I want to add to this dashboard or web application, I want to add tabs to it. I'm going to have 2 outputs. a table and a plot. So there's an option to add tabs. And I'm going to be using the exact same tabs, plot and table. So I'm going to add that next. Yeah, keep crashing. Oh man, I'm getting my tabs and spaces mixed up. There it is. All right, so now I have my two tabs. There's nothing on it right now, but later on it will have stuff on it. So the next thing I want to add to this is I want to add controls. And let me find where controls are on this. Yeah, so controls are specify when the output is updated. For this specific example, when the user selects a state, I want it to update this graph in this table. So I'm going to make a control that will do that. Or otherwise, if I don't specify a control, if I just don't do anything, the graph will never update. And I'm also going to have another control where it'll be an actual button where a user will be able to click that button if they want to download this data for any reason. So it's just kind of a nice use case for the user if they need to download anything. So controls, and this is going to be a list of dictionaries as well. So the first one is going to be a type. So this one's going to be hidden control because it's not going to be an actual button. I want this to update when the user selects a new state. So that's why it's going to just be hidden. So type equals hidden. And ID. You have to specify an ID with it, and I'll show you the reason why here in a second. And then I want another control, so another dictionary, and type equals button. So this is going to be an actual button. This is going to be button 2. Button 2. Label equals download question mark. So now I have this download button. So when the user clicks this download button, it will download this this data frame for them in the form of I believe it's a CSV. So I mentioned there are these IDs. These IDs, they need to tie to the inputs. So I want both of these inputs controlled by this first button. So I need to specify that in this dictionary. And that's with action ID. So what controls that? It's going to be button 1. And then same thing for this guy. Action ID button 1. And I'm just refreshing things to make sure I'm not making any mistakes. I'm still working without any issues. Next thing I'm going to be adding is the outputs. So there are several outputs that you can have. There's HTML, you can have a plot, you can have a data frame, you can have an image, Yeah, so table, plot, HTML, image, and a download. So I'm 3 outputs in this case. I'm going to have a table. In this case, it's going to be a data frame. I'm going to have a plot. That's going to be this guy. And then I am also going to be having the download. So when a user clicks that download button, it will return the results. So I'm going to now add the outputs. And outputs are a list of dictionaries as well. Currently, there is a output for HTML. I do not want that though, so I'm going to remove it. So the first output is going to be a type table. Table. I need to specify an ID for each of my outputs. Table ID. And then I also need to specify a control ID for this. So what happens to update this table? In this case, it's when a user selects a new state, which this is button 1. So button 1 will specify when this is updated. I have multiple tabs on this, so I want to put this on the table tab and on page load. I'm going to specify this to be true. So when the user goes to this website for the first time, I want it to default have the table already loaded for whatever is specified. So that's the first output. Second output is going to be the plot. Type is plot. ID is plot. ID. Control ID is going to be the same thing. Control ID is going to be button 1. I'm going to put this on the and then on page load is going to be true. So one more output, and this is going to be the output for the download button. Type is download ID, download ID. Then the control ID for this one is going to be different. Because I want it when the user clicks this button. If I made it button 1, anytime the user changed states, it would automatically download the CSV for them. That's not a feature that I want. I only want it to download when they click download. So this is going to be button 2. And then on page load, this is going to be different as well. I want this to be false. I don't want, if I set this to be true, anytime the user refreshes it, the download would automatically be updated. The CSV would automatically be downloaded. That's not a feature that I'd want to find that. I think the users would find that annoying. So let's save this and see if it works so far. And no, there it is. It updated. So here's what we have right now. It does fill out the table with just some like default like kind of metadata and some default meta graph. But everything's working so far, which is good. So we have inputs. We have controls, we have outputs. The final thing we need to add, if we remember back to this example, we need to write the function to update the table and write the function or method, I should say, to update the plot. So I'm going to be doing that next. So to do that, I'm going to do it in a Jupyter notebook first. I think it's a little easier to debug there. If you take a look at this, there's two inputs or two arguments, self. This is inside of a class. This is a method, so it has to have self and this params argument. I talked a little bit about that, but what params is going to look like is it's going to be a dictionary, and the key is going to be state 1 lowercase, and the value is going to be whatever the user selected. So I'm based in Kansas City, Missouri. So if I went on here and selected Missouri, this is going to be what the value is going to be. So I want to make this for a initial scenario just so I can test it. So let's say the user went on and selected Missouri and Texas, and state 2 is Texas. So let's go. First, I want to build my data frame because I need my data frame before I can get my plot. So define get data frames. So the first thing I want to do is I need to read in the CSV. And then I want to make that new metric that I came up with, spent per student. I want to specify my two states, but in this case, I'm not going to hard code it in. So I want it to be dynamic. So params state 1 and params state 2. And then I want to set the index to be the year. This is just what I did earlier, just putting it all in a function. And make my new data frame. And I want to return that data frame. So let's see if this works. Get data frames. So it worked in the test example. So let's see if it works on actual one in here. Turn everything over. And this is inside of a class, if you remember. So I need self on any method. Self. Let's try on that. I was thinking about it. So it says name PD is not defined. So it looks I didn't import pandas. So excuse me. It only has Alabama here. That's just because Alabama's selected for both. But so I got my output for my table. It is missing something, and that is the year. So right now the year is the index, and it is not showing the index. So I want to add the year add the index back to the data frame. So I'm going to do df1.reset index in place equals true. That way a year will be a column now. And it tries to make a guess what the plot's going to be. You obviously have to update this. But so here's the results of that. Here's the results of the get data method. So let's now do the get plot method. And I'm going to do it in the Jupyter notebook to start. So define get plots, and it's going to take in params. So the first thing I want to do is I need to run all of this right here so that I have my data frame. So df two equals get data with the params. df2 move my plot. And let's return the figure. Get plot params. So this is what my graph will output. I want to add a title and a label to it. So plot.ylabel, and this is spent per student. And then my title, I'm gonna make this an F string. And I want to do params state one. Make sure that works. Okay. And let's do dot lower, make it lower, or dot title. So now it's normal cast versus params state 2 dot title spent per student by year. All right, cool. So let's move this over to our class now. All right. You know what? I just realized something. This function doesn't. If we remember, I reset the index on this one, which I didn't do in my Jupyter notebook. So I need to do that to make sure it's going to work. Reset index in place equals true. So now I get left with that, and this is probably not going to work the way I want it to. Yeah. So I need to set the index to be the year again. Set index year in place equals true. There we go. So add that to my method. And I want self right here because this is inside of a class. And to reference this method, I need a self in front of that as well. I think that should be good. And we're not good. And plot is not defined. Oh, say that one more time.
Import map.lib.pyplot.
Yeah. I did not import that. Import matplotlib. Pyplot as PLT. This is the style that I always use. And plot.xkcd. Let's try it now. There it is. So cool. So now the user can go in, select different, 2 different states, and get a plot looking at how much they spent per year, per student by year. So if we do Missouri, where I'm from, and we do, so it looks like Michigan spent more per student than Missouri. Let's do, which state is someone from besides Raphael?
Georgia.
Georgia. Let's see Georgia. Pretty much online. So Missouri's been a little bit more recently, but it's pretty close. So like you could really do this with any operation though. Any like data munging that you do in pandas, you could turn this into a dashboard. So I did this for a couple different things at my last job. We had a policy about leaving locomotives online running, and I wrote a script that used a weather API to get the weather, and the policy was if it was below 40 degrees, they had to leave it on, but if it was above 40 degrees, they would supposed to turn it off, and the crews would leave them all on because it was just easier. And they would always just say that the temperature, they thought the temperature was below 40 degrees. So I built this this web application that got the actual lowest weather temperature in that window that the locomotive was running, so we could kind of hold the crews a little bit more accountable and not waste fuel. And I did one for a predictive application as well. You could make this different inputs into a machine learning algorithm. So if we're going to be using this many coal trains and this many grain trains and this many whatever trains, and we'll have this many tons of trains, tons of cargo to haul, like how much fuel are we going to use this month? So you could turn it into like a scikit-learn model as well. So there's a lot of different applications for this. He has a bunch of examples, this Adam Hashari guy. And I would, if you're really interested in this, definitely take a look at some of these examples. One that I thought was kind of funny is he adds a background image. So you don't have to have this default background image. Ooh. Oh man. It's line 183. Stuff I just added in. Getting my tabs and spaces mixed up. Yeah, so there it is. There it is. Well, you can't even see it. But you can have background images. Let's take a look at his real quick. So we just copy this down. And shut this server down. Fire this server up. So if you want a background image of, of a snake, you can do that for your web application. And so this is just like a sine wave, kind of a fun little thing to play around with. But a lot of different applications of it is what I'm saying. There's a lot of custom ability that you can do with it. So like if you know CSS and want to add some stuff, you can really make it really custom. Any questions or anything?
Yeah. Does it render interactive graphs, Jeff? Like
no, it doesn't. It doesn't work with Plotly. I know that. I think they're all static.
Okay.
Yeah,
Jeff, would you be able to share the repo? for this so we could go through the code
Yeah.
on our own?
Yeah.
That'd be great.
I'll include that on this data science resources. I'm going to put this under additional topics, and I'll be putting it right here, and I'll include the repo right there. So yeah, be on the lookout for it there. Also, I'll also include it in the like description of the YouTube video. But yeah, if you're building these and you're stuck or on anything, like don't be afraid to like reach out to me. And I think, especially on like the capstone, like if you can have a web application, like it's going to really make your project stand out. Oh yeah, and I have another thing. You can deploy these to Heroku. They're not too hard to deploy to Heroku. So Heroku is a place where they have a free platform where you can deploy, I think, just a single web app. So if I wanted to deploy this to like an actual website, I could go and show that, and I think that's powerful, especially when you're like showing to like a potential employer, like here's some work I did, and here's you can actually play around with it. That's much more powerful than just being like here's me describing it. Like it's not really exciting. Cool. Any other questions or anything? Alrighty. Well, thanks for joining, and have a great Friday. Have a great weekend.
Yeah, thanks a lot for putting it on, Jeff. I probably will Slack you at some point.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
I just don't have a question ready yet.
Yeah. I think it's a lot of times. A lot of times.
I really enjoyed it.
Cool. Yeah, a lot of times once you're like digging into it, that's when you're like the questions start popping up. So.
Yeah, seems to be the case for me.
Yeah. Well, cool. Yeah. Be happy to help.
Weekend.
Yeah, you too. See you later, everybody.